So, as Anya said, I'm Senior Manager in the Clinical Research and Development Office in Galway. And just to give you a little bit of background on our office was set up following sign-off on a memorandum of agreement between the University of Galway President and the West Northwest Region CEO in 2021. So the MOA governs all clinical research involving patients, data, and their sample. And our primary role is to provide governance, oversight, and support to clinical research in the West Northwest region, it's kind of a mouthful to say, and the University of Galway. So our main responsibilities is to manage the management of the study registration system, and this system was set up last year, and all the research that's being conducted in the hospital needs to be registered on the system. We are also responsible for oversight of the management system, which is QPulse, which houses all of the SOPs to ensure research is conducted in compliance with regulation, study protocol, and GCP. We also have oversight of risk management in relation to clinical research, and we have a finance manager who looks after clinical research finance. We are responsible for the clinical research contracts that we sign off by the hospital, which is the reason why I'm here today. We coordinate the HR secondment process, which was set up last year, and staff from the university can be seconded over to HSE to get access to systems, and vice versa from the hospital to the university. We provide support and guidance for researchers, in particular with new PIs that haven't done research before. And we have a sponsor officer who looks after any of the university-sponsored clinical trials. And we're also responsible for rollout of any of our processes to all of the other West Northwest hospitals in the region. So just moving on to contracts. So delays in contracts review have a major impact to startup timelines for studies. And that's no news to anyone here. This is not just a Galway problem. It's not just a national problem. It's a global problem. So what we did last year is we did a full review of the contract review process here in Galway to see could we identify some barriers and see how we could actually fix them. So what we found when we did our review was that we found incomplete applications for contract review. So we weren't getting sufficient documents. We were getting a bare bone contract, no protocols, no approvals, which were required to make a thorough review. Then lack of knowledge by staff members that were actually submitting the documents, not knowing what documents to submit for the different types of studies. The legal review delays was no timeline set. So our legal review for the HSE is CKT Cork. And again, contracts were being submitted to them, but there was no timelines agreed, so it would be months before they actually respond to us. Again, the same with the CIS cover. E.ON is the broker for the State's Claims Agency. And again, documentation was submitted to them, sometimes incomplete pack, no timelines on their review. And then multiple voices coming into our office. So we were getting documents from the PIs, from the research side teams, for the sponsor, multiple emails and documents getting lost in transit. And then the lack of templates for contracts, which would avoid vigorous legal review. So all of this has resulted in delays in contract execution, loss of studies here in Galway, and institutional reputation damage. So having a study that didn't start up, it wouldn't entice a sponsor to come back again to Galway to do the study. And then Ireland, not a favourable landscape, as this wasn't just happening in Galway, it's happening across the country. And also complexity of reviews also impacted by the data protection requirements of GDPR regulation 2018, where there's now a requirement for a DPIA to be completed, and I'll go through this in a little bit more detail later, and a transfer impact assessment for data that's going outside the EU. And then also the State's Claims Agency have upped their game with the clinical indemnity scheme cover with additional requirements there also. So what we did to change the process in 2023, and it's a year up and running now, so we have a little bit more data on it. We implemented a new online process, and it's to a simple Microsoft Teams system. It requires a little bit of the study information, like the sponsor details, PI details, study details, and then it's literally uploading the required documents. So this is the contract application document list. All of them will not be applicable for all studies. We have a guidance in the Microsoft Teams and we tell you what documents you need depending on the type of study you have. We met with the legal team and we met with E.ON Insurance, and we agreed timelines for them to come back when we actually submit the pack to them. We developed some guidance documents which we have circulated and we update on a regular basis for the site teams and PIs. We delivered a number of training sessions last year, and we also continue to do that, in particular with the new startup specialists, which have been brilliant because they're learning and we're receiving the packs a little bit more complete in the last number of months. There was also the introduction of the IFA HSE template, which is mandatory for IMP studies have changed things dramatically when it comes to reviewing the IMP trials. We have the IFA bipartite, which was introduced in 2022 and is updated this year. And that's for, say, when you have two entities like a sponsor and, say, a side team. And then this year we welcomed the tripartite, which includes a sponsor, a CRO, and the side team as well. So ongoing challenge, we have insufficient and incomplete documentation being submitted, and this is still a challenge. We're still not getting the packs complete, but as I say, they are improving dramatically with the new startup specialists. Sponsor response delays. We're getting our review off the line, but still the sponsors aren't coming back on a timely manner, and sometimes taking months to come back to us, even when a contract is actually finalised. And then the budget review delays, in particular with the IFA template, we're getting the template in, it's ready to go, provided we've all of the other documents, but the budget review hasn't commenced, which can cause delay in that. So what's new for 2024? So we're continuously improving our contract review process, and we'll continue to do that. So we've introduced a timeline for the sponsor to come back to us again. Every email that goes out to them, when we receive a review back from, say, our legal team, and they have comments or query sponsor, they go back to the sponsor with a timeline for them to respond to us. And we've communicated this to the study startup specialist to do that with a date on every email that goes out. For the second round review, so when the contract come in, we send it to our legal team for review. They come back with contracts and queries. That will then go back to the sponsor to review the queries. If all of the queries are accepted, that's well, fine and good. But if they're not, and there's additional queries, then what we ask is that instead of going back to the legal team again, we actually bring all of the legal parties together and try and get everything resolved on a call. And that will take a big chunk of time out of the review process. We've also set up our developed study startup agreement. This is new to this year. Currently being reviewed by our legal team. And what this will allow us to do is to submit, to allow submission of the documentation contract review at the same time as the ethics and regulatory submissions are going ahead. And what the contract will do will cover any costs that have been covered in the legal review and the side team during that time, if the study was to start the months. We've also implemented a new amendment online contract review. We get a lot of study amendments, and these do take time and require documentation packs as well. So that's all going on online again through our Microsoft team. And then ongoing training, we continue to deliver ongoing training as needed to the site team members. So this is what the contract process review looks like, providing research and complete documentation pack in on first round. So side team or study startup specialists will collect all of the documents that's required in their study. They upload it onto our Microsoft team link. Once we receive the link, the documentation pack, we will review that within a few days. If all the documentations are in place, then and we are looking at a previously reviewed template, whether a template has already been reviewed by HSE or it's the IFA template, that pack will go straight to Aon, which is the broker for Estates Claims Agency. And once they come back to us within 5 days, we expect the contract to be signed within 10 days. And this has happened with a number of the IFA templates. If we're receiving a brand new template that we haven't seen before, this needs to go to the legal team. So the pack will be submitted and we will put a date on it for them to come back within 10 days. Once they come back, if they have any comments, which they normally do, or queries on the contract, that will go back to the legal team. And now we're putting that date of 10 working days for them to come back to us. When the sponsor comes back, if they accepted all the changes and there's nothing new to review, then that contract will go directly to sign off, and we'd expect sign off for that within 4 to 6 weeks. If, however, the sponsor isn't happy with all the queries or the changes or the recommendations that the HSE legal team have made, then what we do is we will organise a meeting with the legal team of the HSE and the legal team of the sponsor and try and get everything resolved straight away. And we expect to sign off that contract within 6 to 8 weeks. So how are we doing so far? We have a lot of improvement still to go, but we have made a lot of improvements since the 2023. So contracts, we'll look at the volume first of all. So the contracts are reviewed in 2021 and 2022 combined with 32 contracts. We implemented a new process in February 2023, and last year we signed off 52 contracts. This year, up to October, which is last week, we have 51 contracts already signed. And we'll hopefully get that number above 70 before the end of the year. So the contract timelines for 2023 were 33 days, 2 days for the shortest timeline, and that was a protocol amendment, and the longest timeline 66 days. This year we are looking at average 29 days, shortest timeline again 2 days, and that was amendment, and the longest timeline 86 days. So we just take the amendments out of it. Any of the non-clinical trial agreements, like data sharing agreements, all those alphabet trial agreements, 42% have been signed off in less than 6 weeks, and the majority of those being the IFA template, 51 less than 8 weeks, 80% less than 12 weeks, and 97% less than 14 weeks. And we've only one study that's greater than 14 weeks. And that was due to a sponsor not responding to the queries that we'd sent in 3 months to come back to us. So when you are doing a submission to our office for review, this is the list of documents that are required, and I'll go through these in a little bit more detail in the next few slides. So the clinical trial agreement, your protocol, patient information leaflet, your ethical approval, then the regulatory approval and site suitability form if you have a regulated clinical trial. Then you're looking for your sponsor insurance, your clinical trial indemnity form, and then your data protection documentation and your study budget, and then documentation is required for data that will be traveling outside the EU. So first we look at the clinical trial agreement. This is required for all research studies where the University Hospital Galway collaborates with an external organisation. That could be sponsor, CRO, or other university to conduct a study. So as I said, we have 2 lovely templates now. We have the bipartite national template, and we have the tripartite. When completing these before they submit, and these are probably one of the areas in the office, the study details needs to be submitted, the legal entities of the HSE and the sponsor needs to be completed, and the name of signatures need to be inserted. Also, the financial arrangements and the bank details for the site, and the letter of delegation of authority if there's any delegation of any of the aspects from the sponsor to another organisation. We need to see the letter of delegation, or you may have a sponsor that's based in the US and they have an office here, say in Ireland or within the EU, then a delegation of authority for them to say sign the contracts needs to be seen. And then the delegation of responsibility table of who does what within the study. So what the sponsor is responsible, what the CRO and what the site team are responsible for. And this is signed off by the sponsor and our CRO and the hospital contract sign off. The study protocol then is required for all research studies. We look for the final version. We've seen many times where we're still getting tracked versions or ones with comments still on them. This needs to be ethics approved, and if it's a regulated study, we need to see regulatory approval for the study. The patient information leaflet then is required for all research study involving the University of Galway participants where consent is required. We expect to see this coming on come to our office on local site headed paper. If there's multiple consents, say if you have consent for parent or children absent, we need to see these forms also. They need to be in the final version, need to be approved by ethics, and site contact details for the patient needs to be added. In cases where a HRC declaration is required, this is required when explicit consent for the processing of personal data and health research cannot be obtained. Say, for instance, in instances where the patient is incapacitated for, say, ventilator patients, and they cannot give consent at the time of enrollment. The HRC will give a consent declaration where the public interest of the research project significantly outweighs the public interest in requiring explicit consent of the individual whose data is being processed. And this is according to the Health Research Regulation 2018. So ethics approval. So there's 2 different types of ethics approval we'd like to see. And the first one I would say would be our local Galway Hospital Ethics Committee, and this is more for non-regulated. This is required if your project is a health research project. It includes HSE patients via the HSE health service users and or data biological samples. The HSE staff, services and premises or infrastructure are being used as outside the scope of the regulated committee. And we would expect to see the approval letter with the PI and the institutional name on this. And this is a requirement for the agency that even though the approval has been given, the PI and the sign for Galway on this are the won't accept it. For the NREC approval, then for regulated trials, this is received from Part 2 CETAs, was under the clinical trial regulation 2018. NREC has agreement to review applications for research proposals in specific defined areas. So clinical trials of investigation of medicinal products, clinical trials of medical devices, and in vitro diagnostic medical devices. And the application is submitted through the CETAs. And we expect a report from the system, but for the ethics approval, we also need to see the detail letter from the NREC identifying the site and the PI is being listed also. So regulatory approval. So regulatory approval is required for any trial that falls under the remit of the competent authority here in Ireland, and that's the HPRA. And these trials typically involve investigational medicinal products that fall under specific legislations like the Clinical Trial Regulation 2014 and the Medical Device Regulation 2017. And submission for the regulated studies is done through the CETA system, which is under the Clinical Trial Regulation 2014. And CETAS is the information system that was implemented when the 2014 regulation was implemented into 2022. And we had 3 years to implement the CETA system. So this consists of, for the first year, applications were allowed to be submitted through both the clinical trial regulation, which is the CETA system, or the clinical trial directive, which is going straight to HPRA. From 2023 to 2025, we were allowed to run any of our research under either the clinical trial directive or the clinical trial regulation, with submissions were only allowed for approval through the clinical trial regulation. And from January this year, all studies transitioned from the clinical trial directive over to the clinical trial regulation, which this is something that we will look for if it has been through the clinical trial directive. Sounds like a mouthful, but that's a lot of information. So the clinical trial indemnity scheme requirements, the insurance certificate that's required. It provides compensation in the event of physical damage to the patient or the results in that results from patient participation in a clinical trial. So when we receive the insurance policy, we expect to see the policy date consistent with the trial. The scope of policy is consistent with the trial, so that actually covers the trial. So we have a lot of organisations where they would have a blanket clinical trial policy, and we get that in for submission. But the clinical trial itself may not be issued in it, so we'd expect to see an email or letter to say that this policy covers this particular trial. That the territorial limit includes the Republic of Ireland, so it's legal in the Republic of Ireland, and the minimum limit is 6.5 million in an annual aggregate. So that's the fee that we expect to see on. So this are all requirements by the State's Claims Agency. Ethics approval, then the clinical trial organisation and the PI must be listed on that for Aon. And that the clinical organisation name and the study name need to be the same what's on the CETAS. And this, we find that the ethics approval might abbreviate the study name, or vice versa. It might be abbreviated on the clinical trial indemnity form. It need to match in the PI, and the team would also need to match on it. But the clinical trial indemnity form, then this is the form that provides legal protection for participants of research involved in clinical trials. So it's like a standard national agreement that's been provided by the State's Claims Agency. And in this, we expect to see the clinical organisation, hospital needs to be listed and their correct name and address. Priority, which will always be the C. The PI details that's listed on the ethics approval, sponsor details, and then the study details that's covered under the clinical trial indemnity. And this needs to be signed by the sponsor. We don't need a hospital signature initially, but it does need to be signed by the sponsor, for Aon will submit the letter to us to confirm cover. So the site suitability form, then it's a declaration that confirms the suitability of the site. This needs to be signed off by the PI at ethics submission, and we get the hospital to sign off at contract review. And there's no changes that's really meant to this on the application. The study budget then is required for all research study where there will be cost to conducting the study, as Ron has covered this in detail earlier. To ensure the budget negotiations commence earlier and before contract is ready to sign off, and say this is the issue now because we're getting the IFA templates in, they're ready to go, but the budget still has to go through that review process. And we need to see the final approved budget that has been agreed between the site and the sponsor. So the data privacy impact assessment, then, as I say, this is a requirement under the 2018. So DPIA is required when the possible personal data is likely to result in the high risk for participant in the research project. So the DPIA it's like a risk assessment. So the common questions you find within a DPIA is that, with whom will the data be shared with? How is the data collected and stored? Who will access the data? What are the defined retention periods? What security measures are put in place to protect the data? How is the data being used? And does the data process comply with any legal data protection laws and regulations? And what are the potential risks to the data subjects, and how are these risks being migrated? And I say this is a live document for the life cycle of the study, and it's essential to safeguard personal data and comply with legal requirements and its trust and clinical research. When we receive this document, we expect from the sponsor perspective that they've completed their own DPI agency, are the controller of the data, and they are responsible for making sure that it has been completed correctly and it's been signed off by their DPO. If it's a local HSE project, then the HSE DPI will require to be completed. It needs to be submitted to the HSE DPO. They need to give their opinion letter, and then the DPI template is signed off by the hospital CEO on contract execution. And there is a new link to the health research data impact assessment, which is new from this year to research for the health HSE DPI. So for the studies of data going outside the EU, you need to check what countries, first of all, that it's going to. If the country is under the adequacy decision in the European Union, so that basically means it's countries outside the EU that the European Commission have recognised have the same safety protections in place as within the EU. They will be listed on the website, and we have a link on the Microsoft Teams for people to check that. So say, for example, the UK would be one of the countries in that. So if it is the UK, they are covered. Then if it's a country that's, say, within the US, then we need to look to see if the sponsor is registered within the EU-US framework to say that they will be compliant and to ensure protection is in place similar to the EU. If they're not registered, then we will look for two documents. Number one, the transfer impact assessment, and it's like a risk assessment of that data traveling to outside of the EU, and standard contractual clause, which is a standard document that's been provided by the European Commissioner, and there's different relevant modules. The one that we regularly see is a processor to controller. So the sponsor, they being a commercial company, controller of the data, the site would be the processors, and that clause needs to, that module needs to be completed. So also other ones where you processor to processor, controller to controller, and then controller to processor, depending on the situation that you're in. So key to success: have correct and complete documentations on submission, and this is one of our main issues at the moment in not getting the facts to legal on time. Budget to commence the negotiations earlier. Use the HSE approved templates, example 5-year turnaround on most recent submission. That was on a IFA template that we had perfect documentation submission. Thanks to Katrina for that one. And we were able to get it signed off immediately. And then use of any pre-approved templates. So say, for example, if with the sponsor company that comes with a template for a study, and then we do a rigorous review, that come back to us the same type of study, we'll ask them to use the same template. We've had one at the end of 2023 where a PI came to us, we submitted it for legal review, the 6 days turnaround on the first contract. He came back to us with 3 additional studies using the same template, and the turnaround time for those ones was 6 days, which is really for us to confirm CIS cover. If any further details, I'll be around here at break time, but also please contact our office and also on the website.